Hi, everyone. Shauna Robinson from Wellness A to Z and another episode of Microdose Your Wellness. We are here with Catherine Craig, doctor of acupuncture. She has been in practice for 7 years. We met, gosh, it's been 3 years already in our yoga teacher training. We were the kids that sat in the back of the class. So naturally, we gravitated towards each other. She is amazing, an absolute wealth of information. I love talking to her. We talk all the time, all things TCM. So she's going to talk about how she got into TCM, her, what she's doing to stay sane and healthy in this crazy time, and then offer some tips and tricks for you to do at home. So without further ado, my beautiful friend, Catherine, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Shauna. I'm excited to be here and talk to everybody about, my life, how we're dealing with the pandemic, and where we go from here.
Yeah, I love it.
Mhm. So I originally got into acupuncture. I had worked in the cosmetics industry for a large cosmetics company, and it was pretty much my dream job. And I had gone through a series, I was very young at the time, I was in my 20s, and had gone through a series of kind of very difficult health events. I'd gone to doctor after doctor. They kind of diagnosed me with autoimmune disease, Hashimoto's, maybe you have celiac, maybe you don't. And it was a very difficult time for me, dealing with chronic pain, depression, your body feels out of control, you don't have any answers. And finally, I started going to acupuncture, and that's what really turned things around for me. So while I had this great career that I was in love with, um, I really felt pulled in a different direction. And at that time, I had also been diagnosed with thyroid cancer. And that was really kind of the cherry on top of the sundae for me when I was like, I love my job, I love the corporate world in a lot of ways, but it's not serving me in what I'm supposed to be doing in the world. So at that point, I had my surgery. I came into work, quit gave my 2 weeks notice, and went back to school to study acupuncture. And I've been practicing now for 7 years. I have a beautiful practice and clinic in New Jersey, right on the Jersey Shore. So I'm blessed to be able to do what I do every day of the week that I'm working, and really living, a life that's in balance and that's supportive of both me and the community.
I love that. And I mean, it is definitely your calling. I mean, you're so passionate about it, so knowledgeable about it. And I mean, what happens in people's lives. I mean, and that definitely, impacts what we do for a living. I mean, I was, as you know, I worked in corporate America too. And it was like, okay, this is not serving me. I'm not living my life in a way that's meaningful to me. I'm moving into health and wellness because I had a lot of, similar feelings, just that stress and like hair falling out. And I was
Mhm.
walking around with undiagnosed celiac and gut issues that I had no idea. And it was like, oh, interesting. That's always fun, and, understanding that. And so, you've built this practice, you've built this life, and which is truly amazing. Do you find that there are, specific types of things or illness? I don't want to use the word illnesses, but, sort of like, what people come in for, like what,
Yeah,
yeah,
conditions.
thank you. I can't think. It's 8:45 in the morning. Apparently my brain doesn't work. Like normally I'm like such an early morning person and I'm like, oh, okay, I can't think. I spaced on her last name when we started to do this earlier. You know what? We're in pandemic times. We're rolling with it. We're rough and tumble.
Well, and I think that's the kind of the beautiful thing about, looking at this. And, I'm not necessarily like the most positive person on the planet for those of you who know me, but it's an interesting way to look at things in terms of how Chinese medicine sees how we as a microcosm interact with the macrocosm that's the world around us. When you talk about like what conditions I normally see, it really, I run what I would say is a general practice. So I see anyone from kids up into geriatrics, for a variety of issues. I see a good amount of pain patients because that's generally what people think, oh, acupuncture, my back hurts or my knee hurts or this or that. And so that's a lot of times what people start coming in for. But they stay for other issues because they start to learn. And I find the practice is an educational process as much as a treatment process for the patients in terms of how we start to educate people on how they're living their life. What foods are supportive for certain conditions, what lifestyle activities or exercises can be good for certain conditions, what herbs and supplements can be helpful, and learning how to use these tools in a way so that they're not calling me or coming into the office every week or every other week even, but they're learning to take care of themselves on their own. And so just because of my background, I do see a large portion of my practice has to do with hormonal issues, autoimmune issues, thyroid issues, just because that's a lot of what I've experienced personally. So I have kind of on the ground experience in helping people guide their way through both the Western medical system, because a lot of times people still do need Western medical interventions, as well as the self-care and how they can heal themselves at home through diet, exercise, changes that they might have to make in their lifestyle.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's, acupuncture. I mean, it's Chinese medicine, not Chinese magic, as a friend of mine says. And it is one, it
I
is,
love
it's kind of a prolonged and sustained, pillar, but there are other things that people can be doing: the diet, the exercise, the herbs. I mean, that's, what I definitely focus on. I mean, I do needle, but that's
that.
beside the point. I can do ears legally. I can't do other things, but whatever.
Right.
Well, that's another story.
Well, you know how passionate you are about this material, and I think that's what's important to know, is that nobody owns this. Nobody has, yeah, I'm licensed by the state medical board, and I have a license to practice this type of medicine in my state and in other states in the country. But this doesn't just belong to me. The thought processes and the system of thinking and medicine and, dare we say, magic behind it is something that's accessible to everyone. It's, Chinese medicine's based on the Tao, which is an observation of nature. Anyone can go out inside nature and see, how are the waves moving today? How is the sun moving today? What's the relationship between the sun and the moon right now? I live on the beach, which is very lucky, and it's interesting to see every day I go to the beach. It's different. It's a different terrain. And if we can kind of apply those concepts, that every day is a new day and we have these opportunities to evolve and grow from that, the world would be a different place. We wouldn't feel so stuck in the dogma that we currently receive on a lot of levels.
Yeah, I mean, that's very well put. And, kind of going back to an earlier conversation that we had, prior to, just as we were, chatting, getting ready for this, we were talking about change and what's happening now. And, you were talking about the change is sort of, it is a constant, but, when is this going to be over? So, how are you dealing with this in this sort of funky change? And, you aren't seeing patients necessarily. So how are you taking care of yourself?
Yeah, it's been interesting, and it was a difficult decision to close my office. But what I realized the last week, I was treating people in mid-March, as the news was coming out and this was happening and that was happening. Clearly the directives of the state, so we followed those to be good,
Mhm.
good citizens in a lot of ways. And I am open to seeing emergency visits just to take the burden off the hospital, but it's not that I'm going in and day out and treating people for, what they could wait 4 to 6 weeks or so to be treated. So it's also challenged me in looking at ways how I can be there for my patients when we're not physically in the office. So we've been setting up virtual teleconsults, working with nutrition, remote healing sessions with Reiki to help calm the nervous system, some guided meditation and breath work with people. So using all of the things that we've learned, both through Chinese medicine, through, we mentioned we're in yoga teacher training, through Ayurveda and yogic philosophy, to really
Sound effects, don't worry about it.
really help engender healing with people through this difficult time. And what we were talking about earlier, kind of off camera, was that it's over when it's over. When we're in a process of kind of surrender, like we are now, in terms of letting go of the old and planting new seeds and being ready for how the world might look in the future, both in terms of good news and bad news, so to speak, is that the process is over when it's over. People will often ask, well, how long will it take to treat this? And it's like, it could take a second. Things can shift in a second, or it can be a very long and belabored process. So we just kind of have to hold on to this tension of opposites, so to speak. Well, chaos encircles us, and really see what things look like on the other side of it. So it's not an easy place to be, but it's a meaningful place to be, is what I would say.
I absolutely agree. I mean, it's sort of like lean into that discomfort and, just it's a challenge. And, there's a lot of growth that happens and, who knows what's going to show up for you.
Right.
Do you do daily meditation? Do you do daily breathing or yoga or how are you,
I,
kind of
I
staying in
do.
place?
Yeah, I do. It's a challenge. I'll say, throughout this, I've kept a daily practice of meditation and yoga in my routine. And I'll say it's been challenging being out of my routine because it's like, I'm human too. It's like, I just want to sleep in and watch Netflix and like eat all the bad foods as much as anybody else does. And I do that. Like we have to have space to really, whatever our grieving process is throughout this, to make space for that. But also coming back to the need to get back to the spiritual, for me at least, the spiritual practice of where I am, what I'm doing, and listening to what's going on in the ether, so to speak. Because when I find if I stop listening to that, that's when um, things can really go awry for me personally.
There's so many questions I have. One, and this is a quick one. Have you watched Tiger King on Netflix? Have you ever?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, yeah. Little trashy. But, really what I want to touch on is, you use the word grieving and, grief, as you and I both know, is associated with the lungs. That's a feeling that if there's a lung imbalance, this is a respiratory illness. Like, what are your tips for eating sort of lung strengthening foods or, acupuncture, acupressure points that we can be doing at home that kind of help strengthen that channel?
Yeah, I would say this isn't a mistake that this is happening now. I was reading The Yellow Emperor's Classic, which is a book that's hundreds of years old, and it has a chapter on epidemiology and pandemics, which you think, oh, that's interesting. But this has been going on since the beginning of time, these types of waves of disease, and we've been very lucky in modern times that it's not gone on really in about 100 years that's affected us personally in the United States, because we do have such a high quality of life and high quality of medical care. Um, we are in the year of the metal rat, and the metal
Very
element
interesting.
has to do with the lungs and the large intestine. And when we look at the lungs and the large intestine, again, we were talking before this, there's two guarantees in life. One is that we're born and one is that we die. And when you think of the metal element, it has to do with when a baby's born, the baby cries, and the lungs are the first channel to activate in the meridian. When somebody dies, the last channel to let go in the meridian are the bowels, which is why people release their bowels when they die. And so we look at metal as really this, it's the most yin of yin. And it's really this element that's about this entrance into transition into new ways of being. And when we talk about the year of the rat has to do very much with resilience, recreation, procreation, and determination. So it's a tough year in a lot of ways, but it's going to be a very fruitful year if we can listen and play accordingly, so to speak. So in terms of getting a long answer around to self-care.
No, I'm like, there's so many questions. Like, I could probably talk to you about this for about 14 hours. So,
Yeah,
all good.
we can do a follow-up. We can kind of drill down
Yeah.
into this deeper because I find it very interesting too. Um, but in terms of tips and tricks for the lungs, one, breath work. So doing your yoga breath work, the pranayama, kapalabhati, alternate nostril breathing, everything that's going to activate the lungs, even just kind of deep diaphragmatic breathing. So many people are breathing
So
in the
shallow.
in this upper part of their lungs. Their neck gets tight, their scalenes get tight. We're sitting at our desks, we're on the phone, and we're only breathing into this third of our lungs. What you really want to do is to be able to relax the shoulders, relax the body, get your belly nice and big. Kind of, when I work with kids, I say, put your hands on your belly, because I see kids doing this too, doing the shallow breathing.
Mm-hmm.
You got to get your hands on your belly, deep through the nose. And you really want to feel your belly kind of inflate like a balloon, and down. And that's when you know that the diaphragm's able to relax. If your belly's not inflating like a balloon when you're breathing, that you're a shallow breather, and you've really got to cultivate that deep breath work. And it's a challenge for a lot of people because we've been holding that tension in our nervous system so long that even that simple exercise can be life-changing for a lot of people. So that's one that you can do. In terms of foods, you want to look at compact fruits. So for the lungs, so apples, pears are really wonderful for the lungs. You can do them raw or cooked, whatever kind of suits your belly better. Ginger is really wonderful just because it's an antibacterial, antimicrobial with lemon water. Sweet potatoes, yams aren't specific to the lungs, but they're really nourishing to the spleen, and the spleen and the lungs are complementary pairs to each other. So we always want to support the spleen. So those would be some great foods that you could do. Any whole unprocessed food is going to be supportive of the system as a whole. And then when we're looking at essential oils, helichrysum is, or everlasting as it's known, is beautiful for moving grief in the lungs. You can apply it to your lung points here. Lung 8's a beautiful one on the wrist here. Lung 10, lung 7's right along this bump on your wrist here. And then anything that opens the orifices. So you're looking at your eucalyptus, your peppermint. Lavender is really beautiful. It's more for the liver focus, but it can help open up the diaphragm, which is a really nice
liver focus. Like that's
right.
just sort of that's
we really do, but that's again
yeah, that's another topic. Yeah,
a whole other episode. You know, and so those are some really beautiful places to start. Just things that people would have at home, and that might be easy to find at the grocery store because we know supplies are a little bit wonky right now. So.
Yeah, I love that. What about, I love like cauliflower and dark leafies for lungs as well, because they look like the lungs, and so do apple and pears when you cut them in half. I mean, that's, I love that, the doctrine of signature. I definitely talk about that as well.
Well, that's what you can look at. Foods, they might be specific to one body part, but they're benefiting so many other body parts. So that's why I kind of go, whatever foods are, if you're in the grocery shopping and you're in the produce department and there's a food that resonates with you, pick it up, go for it. Start to listen to your body and eat intuitively. If you're really craving tomatoes, go with the tomatoes, or if you're craving fatty foods, instead of going with the, junk foods or potato chips or anything, look at avocado and see if that satiates you in that way, and starting to listen to your body.
Avocados heal everything. I swear, I eat an avocado a day. I'm like, yes. My mom, we've been ordering groceries and she's like, do we need more avocados? I'm like, always. Like, there's just always avocado. Totally. I had another thought and I just totally spaced on that. But yeah, no, it's so interesting, the metal element. And I learned something today about, just the very active breathing. The first thing that we do when we come out of the womb, we're crying, and that activates the lung channel. And that's the first channel that's activated. I always think of, the kidneys to be the first organ that form, or, it's like sort of the first organ and then the last organ that forms. I always think, for me, kidney is so, because I'm so kidney deficient.
Kidney is the powerhouse of the body in a lot of ways. And it's like the chicken or the egg, but traditionally when they talk about, when the sperm and the egg first meet, the conception vessel and the governing vessel are the first two channels that form, and none of the other channels become activated till the fetus is birthed itself. And at that point, the Chongmai activates, which is another extraordinary vessel, which is associated with the kidneys. And that's really the blueprint that we use to go through life in. And after that point, then there's some stages of the extraordinary vessels and the other channels activating. But it is when the baby cries, that's that first, I guess, like what you're saying, the kidney is inherited from the parents. So it's not that it's not there, but I would say the lung is the first time that child has some agency in the world.
Excuse the gardeners. I have the window open. It's really hot in this room. Otherwise I would close it. We could go on, and I definitely, like there'll have to be another episode, because I can geek out on TCM, as people know, all day long. Oh, I do remember the question. What is your thought? How do you feel about ice water?
I'm interested in it because I've been looking at I've seen, like many other people, the Wim Hof method, and I haven't studied it much. Typically, Chinese medicine says ice is for dead people, and it can be very shocking to the nervous system, but I'm open to new things in the world, because, like, as we talked about, the world changes, and we might have different needs as a society at the time. And I'm also curious about, in terms of kind of this high level radiation that we tend to get, both from, using these wonderful devices that connect us, but there may be some benefit in terms of the amount of heat that transmits into the atmosphere. Right. So you asked about the ice.
How do you feel about it? I'm so like, when people say, they drink a lot of ice water, I'm like, oh my God, that's so shocking to your system. And it takes so long for your spleen to actually heat it up and do anything with it. Same with,
Yeah,
food.
I think with the ice water, it's tricky, and I think it all depends on someone's constitution. Generally, I would say for people, it's not the best thing to be ingesting lots of ice water because it can cause some stagnation in the bowels, and again, um, stresses the spleen in terms of heating it up, just like you said. But in terms of the immune function, again, I'm curious, like with the Wim Hof method and whatnot, with the high levels of radiation that are happening out there with, 4G, 5G, Wi-Fi, everything that we're exposed to on a daily basis, that there might not be some benefit to it, or benefit to people of different constitutions in terms of how they train their body. I think, as we go through this time too, it's brought up issues for me of resources and how people access taking care of themselves through resources and what we have access to or not. And that for me is what's interesting about always going back to the breath work, and what we have available to us outside. Like let's say, with these cold exposures, we live in the tundra up in Sweden. How do we access these healing benefits with what we have around us? If food is not plentiful, or raw foods or unprocessed foods isn't plentiful, how do we heal our bodies with what's around us? And things that are always accessible, for one, are breath work, for two, the natural environment and how we interact with that natural environment, and the relationship our immune systems take with that natural environment. So it's a really interesting question that I think we need to know more about. So
Yeah, definitely. In the natural environment, I mean, it's interesting that you bring that up. My mom and I went for a walk yesterday, and we were walking through the park with her dog. And I was like, I have to take my shoes off and stick my feet in the grass. Like, I just needed that. I was like, it just felt so like, yes, interacting with the natural environment. And, I'm lucky I'm in California. It was 80 degrees yesterday. So,
right.
I was able to do that. But, I would not do that in the ice. First of all, I hate cold. But second of all, that sounds awful.
Yeah, but some people, if that's your only
Yeah.
option, and you feel that pull towards the water, and you feel that pull to be with nature in that way, how is our body going to respond, and what benefit or detriment is it going to have to it?
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot to be studied, and a lot of intriguing question there. So
There's always so much. I swear that's what I love about TCM. It's like there's always something to learn. It's just
right.
it's never done. It's so old and ancient and rich and delicious. But anyway.
That's the beautiful thing about it, though. It's adaptive, and I think even as practitioners, we can get stuck in, like what you're saying, like it was drilled into us, like cold raw foods are bad, warm cooked foods are good, and that, to me, even in dietary therapy, was kind of drilled into my brain, and it took a long time for me to break that. And for me personally, some of my healing has really come through a lot of raw, unprocessed foods that a lot of TCM practitioners would have a problem with. But you have to look at the constitution, the world we're living in, and how our bodies interact with things. So, we're kind of experiments. Our bodies are experiments, in their own right. So
Yeah, totally. I know for me, I was eating or doing, I had smoothies, and, I was eating a lot of colder foods, and I was very yin deficient. And once I started going towards the warmer, it was like, oh my God, what a game changer
right.
this is.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, I know I do get a little like, don't drink ice water, but if it calls to you, you're not going to burn more calories. That's always and
No,
a lot of
no.
people are like, oh, but don't you burn more calories? I'm like, yo, if that's your diet plan, bro, we got a lot of work to do.
Right, and that's what we have to look at. A lot of times, even in weight loss, it's not calories in, it's calories out. It's about the efficiency of how our organs are working. So a lot of times, like, people can start eating more and lose weight because their organs are functioning better. So it's a different mindset, so to speak, than the Western. Westerns, very much, we have an input, we have an output, and we can even see that with what we're looking at with the virus now. People are like, well, you know in terms of disease vectors, they think in terms of exposures that there's an input and an output, but it's not taking into account that maybe I'll be exposed to the virus. The terrain of my immune system might be so much that I process it and it has no effects to me whatsoever, and I can build antibodies that, I might not be spreading it. I might not have any symptoms and be totally asymptomatic, whereas someone else could be exposed to a small viral load and have dramatically different consequences. So we have to look at things less as an input output and more as a terrain issue. But that's a difficult way to get people to start thinking.
I totally agree. And I mean, we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours, but we'll stop there. I think the advice that you gave about, lungs and grief and the breath work and diet is so important. And it's easy for people to do that, right? You have it accessible. If you do have means to go outside or you feel the pull to go outside, absolutely.
Mhm.
That was amazing. Where can people find you? I mean, obviously when you have a practice, physically they can find you.
Yeah, they can find my practices in Red Bank, New Jersey. My website is acuevolution.com, so acuevolution.com, and same Instagram handle and Facebook is at acuevolution.com. So readily findable and available for any questions, comments, concerns. We can set up virtual sessions, like I said, and get you on your way to wellness. So thank you so much, Shauna, for having me.
This was so fun. And again, I mean, we can talk forever. I will include all of those things in the comments below. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. We will definitely answer them. And there will be more of this to come. Thank you so much. And Catherine, thank you for everything. And congratulations on finishing your doctoral program. That's a huge, God, what a, talk about releasing some grief and some stress.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank
Awesome.
you so much.
All right. Thank you guys.